address this august group of individuals belonging to CHP. By all rights, I don't think I should even be here. It's kind of a fluke, and we'll go through a couple of flukes that have happened in my history that have resulted in me being here. But a year or so ago, December 2016, I was just kind of a retired guy, enjoying my grandkids, thinking I would never be doing anything like advocating for free speech in Canada. Canada already had free speech. And, but December of 2016, motion M-103 cropped up, and I decided that I could no longer just sit back and retire. So what I've got here is a little thing I put together, Motion 103 in the Battle for the Soul of Canada. And as far as outlines go, I thought I'd talk a bit about Jim. Wanted to know a bit about my history and how I found myself in this position, advocating for free speech. So I'll talk about from fighters to free speech advocacy. Talk about Motion M-103 as a grand deception. Motion 103 came out, it was a slam dunk. I mean, everybody thought it was a great idea. Who doesn't want to fight the good fight against racism and Islamophobia? Well, I know from my background what Islamophobia is and what it really means. The nation didn't seem to understand that. So Motion 103 was put forward as I feel, a grand deception. As I say, it was supposed to be a slam dunk. Everybody thought it was a good idea. And but then we found out as the debate generated that it wasn't such a good idea. I'll talk about the players and the testimony of M-103. I followed the testimony quite closely on a session-by-session basis with the Canadian Heritage Committee, standing in and witnessing witness testimony. The M-103 results and scorecard, what are we dealing with now? Free speech, the soul of a nation, and fighting back. For myself, from fighters to free speech, early days, I'm from around here. Actually, that's Delta Collegiate. I went to Delta Collegiate in high school, just down the road, just down mountain. And when I was going through my final years at Delta, I had an idea that I wanted to go to university, but I didn't have any money, so I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And then by fluke, one of my high school teachers, Mrs. Somerville, she approached me in the hall, and she said, "Have you ever considered going to Royal Military College?" I said, "No. What is Royal Military College?" I had no idea. But Royal Military College out of Kingston has programs that she thought I'd be interested in, so I decided, okay, I'll put an application in. And I put the application in, and RMC came back, and they accepted me. They were looking for guys who liked athletics and guys who did okay in school. So that seemed to fit the bill. But another fluke, this was way back in 1969. In 1969, Canada didn't need pilots. They were flush on pilots. They had all the pilots they needed. So the only way you could become a pilot in the Canadian Air Force at that time was to go to RMC and have an engineering degree. So I took an engineering degree. I hated engineering with a passion, but I had to take engineering so I could be a pilot, because I figured that being a pilot was better than being in the infantry. I was just talking with the minister about being in the infantry. That's a pretty tough way to go. I thought being a pilot, you know, you do your mission, come back, have a beer. That's my job. That's where I wanted to be. So I kind of fluked into being a pilot. And then I went, my flying career. I did some instructing, and then after instructing in out west, Western Canada, I wound up in fighters. And fighters was my basic, that was my realm. That's where I operated most of my military time, was on fighter aircraft. I was on the CF-104 in the Cold War days, 1980 to 83. We were on the Central European Front, and that was an exciting time. I was in Tiger Squadron, and we used to like to paint up an aircraft, a 104, and fly it around Europe, and kind of tweak the noses of all the other fighter pilots who were, from all over NATO. And they would come up, they would flush up, and anybody who was flying a Tiger Bird, he would get jumped by all kinds of people trying to, take him on. So it was good fun. It was good fun. But the 104 had a moniker, had a nickname, and it was the Widowmaker. And it was a good nickname because the aircraft killed a lot of pilots. Now, for what it was designed for, the 104 is great. It was designed as a high altitude interceptor. But unfortunately, Canada didn't use it at high altitude to intercept. We used it on the deck, low to the ground, as a close air support platform. The problem with the aircraft was that it had real stubby wings, and it was very high wing loaded. So if you flew too slow, it would depart. It would just, the wings wouldn't generate lift, and you'd just fall in the sky. And it had the glide ratio of a grand piano. It didn't glide very well. The other thing was if you pulled back too hard on the stick, if you pulled back too hard, you generate a rate that was capable of exceeding the critical angle of attack for the wings to generate lift. And again, you would depart. It would flip on its back, and you would just lose control, and you're not flying anymore. So I had my experience with that, and what they used to do to counter that pulling back too hard and losing control was they introduced a stick kicker into the aircraft. And what the stick kicker did was if it sensed that you're pulling back too quickly, it would send a signal to a motor which would kick the stick out of your hand, so that it would actually force the nose down, so that you didn't end up departing. So that might be good if you're at high altitude. If the nose goes down, well, that's fine. But if you're flying on the deck like we did all the time, and the nose goes down on you, we could be in a lot of trouble. So I found myself in trouble in Sardinia, the island off the coast of Italy. We have a big gun camp there, and they have a range that you can go practice bomb, practice strafe, practice rockets. And I was leading a foreplane on this strafe range, and we're strafing for beers. And if you strafe for beers, that means that the guy who has the best strafe score, has the most bullets into the target, he gets to have free beer from the other guys. Okay, so this is a pretty big deal. So I figure I'm going to win this contest, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the target. I'm going to get in close. We're supposed to fire from 2,500 foot slant range. I pushed it, I went into about 2,000. And your 10-degree dive, going at a 10 by 20 foot flag that has a big circle in it, that is your target. And so I pushed, probably past 2,000 feet, engaged the trigger, got the cannon firing the bullets out, and I had a fantastic score. Like I had 70 out of 100 bullets hit. It was great. So I won the beer. But then I looked down, and I could see the strafe flag growing in my cockpit window screen. So I said, I got to get out of here. So I pulled, and I pulled hard, and I got stick kicker. And then, no matter what happens, no matter how you catch it, how soon you catch it, that stick kicker is going to put the nose down 10 degrees more than where you were. So now I had stick kicker, and so now I look out and I see the strafe target growing in the windscreen, and it's bigger than my windscreen. I'm in a real hurt city right now. So I figure if I pull back too hard again, I'm going to get another stick kicker, and I'm going to kick myself into the ground. So what I did was I eased the aircraft up. And as I was easing the aircraft up, I could see the horizon come up along beside me. And I remember thinking at that time, I think I'm going to know what it's like to die. I remember thinking that to myself. And so at that time, this is kind of weird, but everything went black. I couldn't hear anything. So I was in a dark silence. And then little bit by little bit, I don't know how long, it seemed like an eternity, but after an eternity, my vision started coming back, and I looked up, and I could see a tumbleweed blowing across the front of my nose. The tumbleweeds at this range were about 4 or 5 feet high. The top of this tumbleweed was above me. So I could see this tumbleweed going by, and I was underneath the top of the tumbleweed. So I was very, very close to the ground. So then I could start hearing noises, and I could hear somebody yelling in my earphone saying, "Canadese, get off of my range. Canadese, you're crazy." It was the range controller yelling at me because apparently I scared the you-know-what out of them again. And so I was so low that I thought if I pulled back even a bit, I'd hit the tip can, I'd hit the tail. So I just eased my way up, ever so slowly, until I got about, I'd say about 50 feet up, and then pulled off. When I got back on the ground that day, my number 2, Bert Doyle was his name. We got back on the ground, we're debriefing, and we're talking about the incident, and my number two, who was right behind me, as I was coming down straight, he was rolling in behind me. He said, I crashed. He said, I saw you crash. And I guess what happened was, I was so low that the wing vortices coming off the wings were blowing the dirt out and up and around the aircraft. And so from the back, what he saw was he saw me disintegrate into a dirt ball. So he saw me crash. To this day, he calls me dead man walking. So, now getting out of that one was a real fluke. That was a real fluke. That was very, very close. So, from there I went to become dead man walking, and I went to dodging SAMs in Iraq. I flew F-18s 1988 to 91. Tail end of that was the Persian Gulf War. I operated there as the F-18, of course, multi-role aircraft. I was an air-to-air force commander. I was a leader of massed fighter jets whose job was to defend an area or a sector against other fighter jets. And I also operated as a air-to-ground mass attack lead. So I would lead massed formations into, in this case, Republican Guard targets, Republican Guard armored targets. Towards the tail end of the war, I led a foreplane against a Republican Guard target. And I don't know if you can see this here, but this is the original target was in northern Kuwait. And things on the ground were moving so fast that by the time we got airborne and were approaching this target, we were told to pull off because that target had been overrun by Allied forces. The Allied forces were just cutting through the Iraqis on fire. So what they did was they said, okay, you go back to an air-to-air refueling station. So I took my foreplane, went back south for a bit. We got a hold of an air-to-air refueler. We topped up our tanks. And while we're topping up the tanks, they gave us a new target. And so we kind of topped our tanks up. We're all airborne. We rebriefed this new mission while we're doing the air-to-air refueling up. And this new mission took us to southern Iraq into what they call the Finger Lakes area. And our target was a large concentration of Republican Guard who were doing a river crossing. These were that one regiment, that one division that escaped, that was allowed to escape up into Iraq and become Saddam Hussein's army after the loss of the war. This was them. I think it was Tanawaka division. So we pick up this target. We had radar ground mapping. It was undercast. We had radar ground mapping, and we could see in the radar ground mapping that the target was huge because all this armor was just reflecting the radar like crazy. Just it was almost obliterating our radar scope. It was so heavy, so dense, so much metal. So I divvied up the targets. We had pinpoint, or we had target points for each of the four guys in the formation. I roll in, and we're rolling in from 30,000 feet, 45 degrees dive, nose dive, because we wanted to avoid the AAA. So I roll in, hit my release point, release the bombs, and I pull off. Shortly after I pull off, I get a strobe. Oh, by the way, these you can't really see it here, but all around that target are SAM threat rings. There were a lot of surface-to-air missile systems in that particular area, and it makes sense because we're having a crossing of a division or a brigade with its own self-defense capability. So they had all kinds of surface-to-air missiles with them to defend themselves, especially when they're vulnerable and going across a river crossing. So my radar warning gear, this is a test pattern, but the radar warning gear in my aircraft lit up like a Christmas tree. And that tells me, the radar warning gear, it'll give you a strobe. And that strobe will tell you if you're being looked at, if you're being acquired, if you're being locked on, which is not good, or you've got a missile launch, which is very, very not good. So as I came off the target, I got a lock, and then I go into defensive maneuvering. So I have to maneuver the aircraft to minimize its ability to hit me and maximize the ability of my aircraft and its jammers and the chaff that I deploy to defeat the threat. So I got locked on, I went through my maneuver, hit some chaff, lock went away. No problem. So now I turn back and I'm on my way back home. As soon as that lasted for about 10 seconds, and boom, I got another lock on. So I had to maneuver, chaff, go away. Broke the lock. And then after that, I got a lock on and another lock on. I got 2 lock-ons. So now I had to maneuver against 2 of these threats. Chaff, go away. This happened over and over again. So what I was dealing with was a system that had controllers that were good enough to reacquire very quickly and get weapons back on me. And then as I was going through this whole process, I got missile launch. So now I've got missiles in the air against me. So I'm maneuvering, I'm chaffing, and I'm getting lock on and launch signals from multiple positions on the ground. So I think what happened was I was first guy in, so I think all of the enemy defenses were on me. And I think the other guys, I came back in, afterwards in the briefing, and they didn't see anything. They said, what do you mean? We didn't see anything like that. Everything was on me. So anyway, long story short, I knew this system that was that had me. It was the SAM-11, and we train and we know the system, we know its parameters, we know how effective it is, and where its effectiveness ends. So as I was doing this maneuvering and easing my way further and further away from the SAM systems, I reached a point where I was so many miles away from the target, and I thought to myself, okay, I'm at the edge of his capability. And as soon as I got there, I had about 3 strobes I was dealing with. They all went away. That was really scary, because now I'm thinking, the guys who are operating these systems not only are good at reacquiring, but they know the system very, very well. And they know that I've escaped. Now they're shut down, now they're going to go after someone else. But they were on me for so long that all my buddies got out and didn't see anything.
Did they get you beer for that?
Pardon? We got back on the ground, and very shortly after that, the war ended. And everybody forgot everything. So I didn't beer of that. The beer, I told the guys after on the 104 after I just about crashed, I said I won the beer. And they said, no you didn't, you got thrown off the range. Your score doesn't count because you got kicked off the range by the range control. We heard them.
What's the speed to fly at in those bombers?
Our delivery speeds are about in the order of 500 knots, so that's knots, that'd be about pushing 600 miles an hour. Somewhere about that.
Were you by yourself most of the time, or were others with you in the plane?
Always, I was a single seat fighter pilot. Always by myself, yeah.
What's chaff?
Pardon?
What's chaff?
Chaff, we carry canisters in the aircraft, and from a switch in the cockpit, we can hit a switch, and it deploys metal chafings. And the metal explodes behind the aircraft and gives a secondary target for the radars that are tracking us to be distracted by. So, I had no chaff left when I got home. This is my foreplane. These guys are great. But I call it my death dance over Iraq. Okay, so, you know, I look at that, and I started reflecting on the nature of flukes. How many flukes can a guy have, and, you know, you can call it coincidence. So I started thinking, maybe there's something else going on here. I know when I was flying fighters, I'm not embarrassed to say, I used to say a little prayer before I went airborne. You know, ask the good Lord to maybe keep an eye out for me and my buddies. I did it before every flight. So now I started thinking maybe there's something more involved here. Maybe it's a matter of faith. Maybe I'm dealing with something that's faith related. So I became curious and I started reading. Read the Bible, paid particular attention to what Jesus said. Read anything I could get my hands on that discussed Judeo-Christian ethics, history, traditions. At one point, I was reading encyclopedias. It was nuts. I drove my wife nuts too. But out of that experience, out of that reading experience, I came away with a fairly good grounding in what Christianity is about, what Judaism is about, and what its traditions are. Then I went to Air Canada, and at Air Canada, I finished my Air Canada career on a 777. That was a beautiful airplane. On September 11, 2001, I was flying a DC-9 from Quebec City to Toronto. And it was a very odd trip because we got within 100 miles of Toronto, and we started talking to Toronto Control. And the first thing Toronto Control came back was you're cleared to land. Well, you never clear an aircraft to land 100 miles out. Usually you don't get cleared to land until you're almost on top of the runway and the guy in front of you is pulled off. So getting cleared to land 100 miles out was really spooky. And then we landed and we see the tarmac is full of iron. And there's all these aircraft that were just parked everywhere on taxiways and runways. As it turns out, we were one of the last aircraft in Canada to land at the time of the terror attacks. So we were airborne just as the attacks were ongoing. So we landed, went into the ready room, and we were there in the ready room to see the towers fall. So right there, that got me thinking along other lines. It got me thinking about, all the news reports are saying these guys are cowards. These guys, these terrorists are cowards. And I was thinking, no, these guys aren't cowards. No, these guys, they believed in something so deeply that they were prepared to die for it. These are not cowards. To me, it was like the kamikazes of World War II. Yeah. Kamikaze means divine wind. I thought these guys were of a Bushido cult, warrior cult. But I didn't think they were cowards. The other thing that I reflected on was that was being told, everyone was telling everyone that Islam is a religion of peace. And I'm thinking, this is not very peaceful. I did a lot of studying on Christianity, what its belief systems are. And this is supposed to be, Islam is supposed to be an Abrahamic religion. And I'm saying, that's not Abrahamic. These guys are something else. So I got interested in these guys and I started reading. And I did a deep dive on Islam, what it's about, what its belief systems are, what its doctrines are. And when you do that, you look at three things. You look at the Quran, the primo source of Islamic jurisprudence and Islamic belief, the Hadith, which are the sayings and the traditions of the Prophet, and you look at the Sirah, which is the life of the Prophet, his biography. So I looked at these three things fairly heavily, and I found that when you look at the history of Islam, you have a period when Muhammad is in Mecca, and he's not doing very well. But he's teaching religion, he's teaching love, no compulsion in religion. He's teaching it's very Judeo-Christian, but he only has about 150 followers. That's after 13 years. While he's teaching, he really annoys his hosts, the Meccans, and they put him into exile. So you go, we've had enough of you. Go to Medina. So he goes to Medina, and that is called the Haraj. I might mention that a little bit later. The Haraj, the emigration from Mecca to Medina. Now in Medina, all of a sudden he starts talking about politics and he starts talking about jihad. And now he starts accruing followers. 100,000 after 23 years. He's got 100,000 followers. He's gone from 150 to 100,000. And what he appealed to was he appealed to a desert culture that appreciated caravan raiding, brigandeering, that appreciated booty. They appreciated loot and booty. And that was all part and parcel of jihad. And that's Muhammad's genius, was getting all that stuff together in his new belief system. So when you break up the Medinan Quran, the verses that come from Medina, the jihad phase, and the verses that come from Mecca, you got about a 60-40 split. When you look at all three texts, canonical texts of the of Islam, the Quran comprises only about 14%. The Hadith, sayings and traditions of the Prophet, only 60%, and then the Sirah about 26%. It gets really interesting when you start looking at the amount of time and text devoted to the kafir, the non-Muslims. This is a religion that spends an awful lot of time looking at what we should be doing with the kafir. In the Sirah, his biography, he spends about 81% of the time talking about what we're going to do to those guys over there. The trilogy as a total talks about the kafir 51%. The majority of the time, the religion is talking about what to do with the other. That's odd. Our religion, we talk about our relationship with God and what we need to do to join God in the afterlife. Not so. Anti-Jewish text or in the trilogy, you can see the Median Quran talks about Jewish folks in a bad sense, about 17% of the time. And if you look at the text devoted to jihad. And don't fool yourselves, jihad is not an inner struggle. Jihad is war against non-Muslims, and I'll show you that a bit later. But the time devoted to jihad in the Sirah, 67%. So Muhammad's biography, he spent a lot of time talking about and doing the combat ops. The Medinan Quran, 24%. In the Meccan Quran, that's interesting, they don't talk about jihad at all. When he was in Mecca, he was teaching peace. There was no talk about war. And if you look at the amount of Sirah devoted to topic, you can see that in Mecca, the topic discussed was teaching and religion. In Medina, it was politics and jihad. So we see a progression in Muhammad's life from peacefulness to warlord. Words devoted to political violence. This is kind of interesting. In the New Testament doesn't devote any wordage to political violence. Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, 34. And then in the Islamic trilogy, these are thousands of words. In the Islamic trilogy, they talk about political violence, 328,000 words. This is Dr. Bill Warner. He studies Islam from an empirical standpoint. He puts numbers to the belief system. Status of women in the Quran, low status. The Quran basically has a fairly low viewpoint of women by its own texts and verses. In the Hadith, it's even worse. The low status of women shows up like 89% of the time. So women are not really treated like men. This is important here, the meaning of brother in Islam. And in the Abrahamic religions, we have the golden rule. In Islam, you have a golden rule, but it only applies to brothers. Treat other brothers as you would have them treat you. A brother in Islam is either a blood relative or he's another Muslim. So when you talk about golden rule in Islam, it's very exclusionary. It's only with other Muslims. Okay, so we have all this stuff that I was going through, and I was gathering all this information, looking at all this stuff, and I'm thinking, okay, well, how do they order this into the religion itself? How do they determine what's more important, the Meccan portions of the Quran or the Medinan, the more violent verses of the Quran? Well, they get into, Islamic scholars get into the theory of abrogation. And abrogation means that last is best. Actually, that's just like the prophet of Muhammad. He's the last prophet, therefore he's the best. He beats Jesus, he beats Moses, he beats everybody, because he's the last. Abrogation. Previous conflicted teachings are superseded. So those Meccan teachings, they're superseded by the Medina verses. As a matter of fact, the Quran 2:106 says, when we cancel a message, this is Allah talking, or throw it into oblivion, we replace it with one better or one similar. Do you not know that Allah has power over all things? So it's making an excuse here for changing the minds. Okay, in the Quran, you start thinking one way, but don't be surprised if things change later on. And those later things are better because of abrogation. Abrogation is the foundational underpinning of Sunni Islamic doctrine. And that's how they determine which verses have precedence over which other verses. Sharia law concepts. There was a time when Muslims amongst themselves, in a few hundred years after Muhammad, were discussing fervently, is the Quran a man-made book, or is it co-eval with God? And the people who thought it was a man-made book and therefore could be interpreted like we interpret the Bible, those were the Mutazilites. And the people who said it was from God, could not be altered, was immutable, they were the Asherites. So the Mutazilites and the Asherites fought, and these were violent battles. At the end of the day, the Asherites won out. And basically, they did so on the good works of Al-Ghazali. He won the argument based on Islam's own canonical texts, and through the rule of abrogation, Al-Ghazali bested the Mutazilites in the argument with his arguments. So his argument was that deity and the deity and Quran were infallible. No man-made second cause is possible. Everything is first cause from Allah. Allah controls everything. If man's choice could actually affect a change in the world, well, that would mean that man is superior to Allah. We can't have that. So Al-Ghazali argued that that's not possible. Everything is only first cause. There's no second cause. And man makes no contribution to his own fate. Whoa. That's different from Christianity. So, the divine will animates the world. No man-made reason, logic, or outcomes. That's where Sharia law is positioned. Now, the problem is that they call the gates of ijtihad. Ijtihad was a get-together of Muslims. When Muhammad was alive, when they had something to work out, he would gather the folks together and they would discuss things, and they would come up with a solution. After Muhammad was gone, Muhammad in one of his verses said, well, when I'm gone, well then, I trust that you will get together and sort things out. And those gatherings were ijtihads. Okay, so what happened after a couple of 100 years, we had these big battles, Asherites, Mutazilites. Asherites win. They decided that it's time to close the gates of ijtihad. So no more discussions. We know what we need to know. Sharia is Sharia. It's immutable, it's not going to change, and it's not going to change from here on in. And that is the case today. The gates to ijtihad have been closed in Sharia. Sharia cannot be changed in accordance with Sunni Islamic doctrine. Why is Sunni Islamic doctrine important? Because 85% of the world's Muslims are Sunni. They're the vast majority. Okay, when you talk about law, Sharia law, the best place to understand it is to go to a book called Reliance of the Traveler. It was written in 1368 by an Islamic scholar. If you look up the Reliance of the Traveler on the internet, you won't be able to find it. Because back in, when I first started on M-103 back in 2016, I could go to the internet and I could look up Reliance of the Traveler. I could have all kinds of Google things pop up and I could click on them and I could look at the document and go all the way through it, all of its sections. About 1,100 pages, I think, or something. But now if you go, you'll see that there's a copyright writer on showing on the document. So this 700-year-old document, someone is the Islamic scholars are claiming there's a copyright on it, and you can't see it unless you buy it or they control its dissemination. So they're obviously very worried about people looking at this handbook for Sharia. And when you get into it, you can see why. Because well, here we talk about 85% of the Sharia really impacts 85%. The Reliance of the Traveler was written by one school of Sunni Islamic jurisprudence, the Shiafi school. The three other schools, however, they look at the Reliance of the Traveler and they see they're in accordance with 75% of it. So the vast majority of what's in the Reliance of the Traveler, Sharia law-wise, is good to go across the Sunni population. And you might think, oh, it's 700 years old, but no one looks at it now. Well, as early as late as 1990, Al-Azhar University, the top authority in Islamic jurisprudence in the world, wrote that the Reliance of the Traveler was a respected and authoritative book of Sharia. And then the Institute for Islamic Thought basically said the same thing, and that's the Muslim Brotherhood outfit. Very powerful. And you look at things like apostasy, penalty, death. If you apostatize yourself and you're offered a chance to come back into Islam and you refuse it, death. Jihad. The Reliance of the Traveler states up front, jihad is war against non-Muslims for the sake of the religion. It's not an inner struggle. They call war for the sake of Allah the lesser jihad. The inner struggle to be with Allah is the greater struggle. But the inner struggle has to happen before the greater struggle can happen. Female genital mutilation? Yes, it's obligatory. Okay? All this stuff about female genital mutilation has nothing to do with Islam. Is a tribal practice? No, it's in Sharia law. Sex slavery? Yes. If you capture a woman with a child, by virtue of taking them captive, they become your slaves. And immediately, the marriage, if that slave woman was married, her marriage is immediately annulled. She's yours. Treatment of non-Muslims. If you're a Jew, a Christian, or Zoroastrian, you're lucky because they won't ask you to convert or die. They'll ask you to convert, die, or live under Muslim rule as a dhimmi, which means that you have to be very restrictive in how you live your life in a Muslim community. There are certain things you can do, a lot of things you can't do. Some of the things you can't do, I put here, the Pact of Umar. This is a descriptor of what a Christian, say, could do in a Muslim community. Well, I think it says here that you can't build churches in their communities. Oops. Yeah, you can't build churches in their communities. You can't mount a horse. You can't have weaponry on you in their communities. And you can't display crosses or religious books, Christian books in their communities. And I see why Saudi Arabia, you can't, if you're in Saudi Arabia, I was stationed in Doha, Qatar. I couldn't have a Bible. They would search all of our mail to make sure Bibles weren't being sent to us, crosses weren't being sent to us, because all of that stuff in a Muslim community is no, you can't do it. And it's part of Sharia law and the Pact of Umar. So, motion M-103 as a grand deception. Petition for E411 premised motion 103, and it basically said that Canadians are systemically racist and religious discriminators, and we're all Islamophobic, and therefore we need to be quelled. And that came out of motion E411. That motion, or the petition, I should say, also stated that besides being racist and Islamophobic, terrorists who claim to be Islamic are not Islamic. Islam is a religion of peace. It doesn't have terrorists in it. And oh, by the way, these terrorists are so infinitesimally small that they're not a problem anyway. So the petition itself was full of mistruths. Our silly members of parliament, they approved petition E411, 26 October, in a unanimous fashion. Everybody thought it was a good way to go. We're going to show, virtue signal, the fact that we're against racism and religious discrimination. The sponsor, Samir Majoub, is president of the Canadian Muslim Front, and that happens to be affiliated with the Muslim Association of Canada, which is a Muslim Brotherhood front. I told you that I would mention a couple of names here that, as we go through, so you can keep an eye out on where these folks pop up. The M-103 objectives, I say garbage in, garbage out. They said that we're systemically racist. Actually, if you look at the numbers and break them down, there was a 13% decrease in hate crimes incidents per capita over the years 2009, 2016 in Canada. So actually, racism and hate crimes are going down. But we're being told that they're exploding exponentially. That's all. All terms undefined. Islamophobia was undefined. That was a very, very big problem because when they use the term Islamophobia in Europe, it means criticism of Islam, of the belief system. Not of Muslim individuals, but of the belief system. And what we find now is in Europe that people are being put in jail because they criticize Islam. That's what they wanted in Canada. They want to collect contextualized data, but they give no parameters for the data. And it was a very, very loosey-goosey kind of operation. And I say, I see this, what happened here was, we have, over the last couple of decades, we have phobias pop up, and these phobias have to be dealt with through the legal process. And if you don't deal with it, you are lambasted. You're called a bigot. You're called a racist. You're called a xenophobe. I think they started off with same-sex marriage, and we became homophobic. And then we had the gender identity and expression issue, and we became transphobic. Now this is Islamophobic. So in my mind, I think where M-103 was going to go, its real aim was to introduce Islamophobia as another one of these grounds for discrimination in our human rights code. Just like now we have homophobia, we have transphobia. They wanted Islamophobia in there. That's what I think was the deal. And that's why in December of 2016, I couldn't sit down anymore. I know I know what they're doing. And so I just couldn't sit by and not do anything at all. So I threw a Hail Mary. I said, you got to do something. So I started a petition. And it was just a Hail Mary. I just put a petition up there. And I wrote a letter to all MPs, every one of them. I wrote and I said, this is what's going on. You know, pay attention. But what happened was, a couple of people I know in the Toronto area, a couple of Jewish groups popped up, and they said, well, we're interested in what you're doing. A couple of other groups in other places, they popped up and said, yeah, we're interested. What's your petition website? And so the petition went nuts. Okay, overnight I went from like 1,500 signatures to like 25,000. Okay, as we got close to the voting date for M-103, the Conservatives changed course. They were saying Islamophobia is a good thing. We should bang ourselves over the head and decry the fact that we're all Islamophobic. But they changed course and they said, hey, wait a minute, we need to define this. And they went against M-103. That was a big turn. Canadians, they had a poll. In the days before the vote, only 14% of Canadians thought it was a good idea. 14%, and the Liberals still charged on. In the day before the vote, Brad Trost on his Facebook site said that he had recorded amongst his friends 900,000 emails went to parliamentarians just before the M-103. 900,000. That's unheard of. That's never ever happened in Canadian history. So, and the vote 201 to 91 party lines. Okay, so the Liberals really they were going to do this come hell or high water. Come hell or high water, they're going to do this.
So it passed or it didn't?
It passed. The motion passed. They wrote a report. After.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, am I overdue?
No, not at all.